Welcome to this 2019 season in review for the women's triathlon team, and being joined by head coach Jeff Shawhan, who just completed his second year for a program that's been around now 5 seasons. And coach, you go back to this past fall and the season that was. How would you kind of go about summarizing the 5 or 6 events you guys were in?
It was a season of growing pains, if you want to look at it that way. We had a really young team this year. We had 4 of the 8 were basically freshmen and sophomores. Actually, probably 5 of them. So it was sort of a learning experience for some of them, and some of them, it's first experience in NCAA triathlon. So,
was there one event? I know when you look at results, you finished third at the MSOE Splash and Dash, but is there one event maybe among the rest that stood out as far as performance?
I would have to say probably the regional that was in Virginia. The girls did really well there. The competition now on D3 level is fantastic. I mean, it's really gone up since the 2 years I've been here. So it's really something to gauge the girls against that was really good, and their performance ended up fantastic. So.
You talk about the competition level. How about the sport as a whole? It's at least in my opinion, I still feel like it's a relatively new sport, at least around these parts. But are you starting to see it pop up more and more across the country?
It's really something because it's not really a juniors. It's not something that like high school programs have. Mm-hmm. More high schools are starting to get into it. But it's more of an age grouper type race or age grouper type sport where people that are retired or middle-aged do most of those. So those races are sort of focused around there and less on juniors. There is a juniors program that's set up around the United States, and a lot of the schools go after those kids because those kids already have the experience of triathlon. But mostly it's really kind of gathering kids that either have experience in cross-country or swimming, and then trying to get them up to speed on the other 2 sports. So.
And we'll talk about that more as we look ahead at the end toward the future of this program and how do you go about recruiting, because as you mentioned, some of these athletes have so many different backgrounds. It really isn't a triathlon program at the high school level. But you look at your roster from this past season, and again, about 5 of those, back from a year ago. Was there still that learning curve, though? You kind of mentioned it a little bit. Was there still kind of that learning curve even with, a handful of athletes that were back?
Yeah, I think so, because unlike other sports where you can pick up the sport within like a couple weeks before the season starts, this is really a sport where you have to come in at a certain fitness level, and that has to be somewhat maintained during the whole season. So it's really tough on the athletes because you get a little bit of time detraining, like they spent the last 2 weeks detraining where they tell them not to do anything to do with triathlon, and then start them back up again and voluntarily, and then get them going to keep their if you think about it in terms of like blood volume and stuff like that, the ability to be able to keep a high fitness level throughout the season and then go into the season really maintaining at that point. So it's unlike other sports where, again, 2 weeks out doesn't really do you very much.
From a training perspective for incoming freshmen, what do you tell a freshman? How do they go about preparing for what's going to be this season?
A lot of times what I'll do is I'll focus on what their weakness is or their background that they have least experience in, and then what we're trying to do is focus on that to hone that in. A lot of the kids come in where they'll have either running background and they'll be lacking that swimming background. Obviously, swim is the first event that they're going to be in, and it's really important they come out of the water in a good position. So the focus then for them becomes the swim and shifting toward the others as we develop that swim.
Looking at results, are there a couple athletes that maybe stood out that made some great strides from start to finish?
Yannicka Bennick was our freshman this year, and she comes from a mountain biking background, which is interesting because mountain bikers are a different breed. They're great to have as triathletes because they're really aggressive on the bike. I mean, they crash all the time in mountain biking. So in our sport, to crash and then get back up on the bike and then go at it again is fantastic. Whereas some road kids, the kids that, only have the background on the road, they crash, they think about getting back on the bike again. These kids really get back. She did a great job. I mean, she had that background in some swim, and then she also had that mountain biking background. We just need to work on her run a little bit.
You bring up an interesting point because, again, for people like myself, and I fully admit I don't know a ton about triathlon, but when you look at one event, what does that entail?
So you're talking about basically a 750 yard to a 900 yard swim. And then they're off into transition. Then they mount their bikes, and then they do a 20K or a 12-mile bike ride, and then immediately into transition, switch off their biking shoes, get on running shoes, and then they'll do a 5K, 3.1 miles. And and it's trying to gauge the efforts too. To go as hard as you can go, but not quite as hard as you're sort of on the edge of as hard as you can go through the first two sports, because you don't want to get so far behind, especially in NCAA racing is draft legal. So if you get lapped out on the bike, you're out of the race. So it's really important to put a lot out there, and then really it's hanging on the run. And you see the kids that excel in the sport manage all three of those really well, and then also run really well at the end.
You talked about, the training that goes into the event, but how about the preparation, leading into maybe a week out? How do you go about preparing? Because I got to believe, at least, on campus in this setting, you're kind of, when you look at your surroundings, you're kind of condensed on what you can do.
Oh, sure. So we have a cycling studio, which is fantastic because of the weather that we have and the restrictions that we have due to weather. I mean, as soon as it starts dropping below 60 degrees outside, you think, well, 60 is not too bad, but go out and ride a bike at 60 and increase the wind and everything else. It's really cold. So the indoor cycling studio with the smart trainers we have allow the students to really get it, their athletes, to get in and do the work, and a really good work. I mean, it's a really focused training. And then swim, we have to travel off campus for the swim because we don't have a pool. So we're up to port, and they're in the pool probably by about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then turn those sessions over. Yeah, that's a really good sales pitch for them.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Come on in at 5:30.
Wake up, get up.
Yeah.
Speaking of sales pitch, okay, when you look at athletes, and you touched on this a little bit already, different backgrounds, what are you looking for? And how do you know, at least in your opinion, this athlete has the ability to be a competitive triathlete?
I think it comes down to like any sport that you look at, if that person has a really good athletic background. For triathlon, you really look at a kid that has a big aerobic engine, if you can think about it that way, a kid that's able to process oxygen in their blood, if you go to technical terms, to be able to handle the endurance end of the sport.
Wrap it up by, as now you look ahead to 2020. What is the off-season focus as far as the program continuing to grow? How do you go about doing that?
Sure. So the girls on off-season training for them is a bike focus, really to pick it up on the bike. That's where they can make the most gains. It's sort of maintaining the run, and then focus on the swim for some of the kids that aren't really good swimmers. And it's just out recruiting. It's out reaching out to juniors level triathlon, and it's out looking at swimmers. I mean, ideally, if somebody had a background in only one of the three sports, in draft legal NCAA racing, swimming is the advantage in the sport. To come out of that water in that top position is something that's highly valued.
Well, Coach, appreciate your time. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
the knowledge, the information, and best of luck here in the off season.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.